Yeah, so I mean, Israel is a major player in the kind of global economy that has grown up around border technologies and military grade technologies that are used for border enforcement. Um, and it's important to pay attention to this player because of this kind of normalization of the tech that's first tested out in occupied Palestinian territories and then sold for profit to the European Union or the United States, like the AI towers that you're mentioning by Elbit Systems, but also the Heron drones that patrol the Mediterranean and Aegean corridor, and other types of surveillance technology too that we've seen that has Israeli links, that's weaponized against journalists and critics and people on the move themselves. um, for me, it was really important to include a section on Israel and actually to go to the occupied West Bank in the spring of 2023 to try and get a sense of what these technologies of apartheid are doing. And this is also building on work, for example, of an amazing book called The Palestine Laboratory by journalist Anthony Lewinstein. He's a Jewish Australian journalist who wrote this book a few months ago, and it basically details how the Israeli state has become, the major purveyor of surveillance technology around the world. I zeroed in on the kind of border tech elements of it, but it was really very eye-opening and life-changing on some way to see just how these technologies of coercion and control were used back then, not to mention an amplification since October 7th, right? A year ago, the genocide in Gaza started. And it's, I think it's quite telling that we're talking today because to me, it just again highlights like how war, technology, migration, fear, all kind of are bound up together in this ecosystem where a lot of powerful actors are trying to make money off of it and profiteer off of human suffering. And that's something that you really see in the way that Israel is using technology.
You mentioned Israel as like all the roads lead to Israel where the technologies are produced, but you mentioned also other borders where there are those big like basically test labs for all of those places. You mentioned Greece. I would assume U.S.-Mexico border is one. Maybe now Polish-Belarusian border. Are there like borders that are like always like for sure the ones that will test those new things and are the new frontier?
Yeah, I mean, I think the frontiers are the ones definitely where this kind of high risk laboratory of tech has been proliferating. US Mexico, definitely, because that's also such a major election issue, right? And massive amounts of money are being pumped into that border system to test out different smart walls, different sensors, robo dogs, AI towers. Frontiers of the EU, absolutely. I mean, Greece has been kind of at the vanguard, so to speak, oftentimes referred to as Europe's shield in European policy documents, right? It's very, very clear what's going on there. Also, massive amounts of money from the European Union being funneled into Greece for surveillance and surveillance testing. And yeah, definitely, it's interesting too that you mentioned the Polish-Belarusian border because after the Lukashenko regime was weaponizing migration and trapping people in that corridor for months at a time, and recently once again reports came out that the Polish government was wanting to learn from Greece to use some of the surveillance technology that's being tested out in Evros and on some of the islands, and then repurpose it for the Polish-Belarusian border. So there's a lot of learning that happens between different jurisdictions as well, and because this is a kind of regional and a global goal to introduce as much technology and as much surveillance into migration control as possible.
My just personal comment about this, because when the fence at the Serbian Hungarian border was built, and Hungary would allow themselves to just use any type of technologies, but also use a lot of violence at those at their border. They got a lot of criticism from the European Union, from member states, from the European Commission, and it is really ironic that instead of building better systems to manage the situation and the crisis better, it went more Hungarian way. So basically, violence is present at every single almost European border, for sure the external borders. And those technologies that were used, this is being moved as well and tested at other borders, but also, creating of those, we were just discussing those border hunters group, people who are the true believers in securing their homeland and just driving along the border, trying to hunt for refugees and migrants and asylum seekers. It's just sad that it went this way, something that was really criticized, that went against European Union values, now is the new norm.
For sure. And, I think this is unfortunately a global phenomenon, right? That we're seeing in Canada, in the US, in Australia, and the EU, these politics of fear that animate so much of the decision making that gets made when it comes to migration. And also using these kind of framings, right, of people on the move as the ultimate other, as the group that is coming, to take over the West, right? I mean, it's so obvious when you start picking apart the kind of logics that underpin why certain decisions get made. And also these like short-sighted ways of thinking about migration, right? Rather than looking at the root causes of conflict and what is forcing people to move, right? We're thinking instead of deterrence, right? Making the journeys as difficult as possible so that people don't come. This is, a common argument that I see even with smart border technologies.
Mm-hmm.
States say, well, we need this to prevent people from making dangerous journeys. That doesn't work. What it does is it forces people to actually take journeys through more difficult terrain, whether through Evros, whether through,
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the Sonor Desert. There's been, a documented increase in the number of deaths since the introduction of the smart border kind of wall system at the US Mexico corridor, right? So it's just these kind of short-sighted ways of looking at human migration, which is something that's been with us since, day one of humanity. People have always been moving. And yet now, because it's again this kind of politics of fear that animates everything, it really gives rise to this increasingly sharpened system. And that's where the digital technologies kind of come in. They make it as difficult as possible for people to be able to exercise their human rights and move.
This was one of our summer shorts, meaning a short episode that is part of a larger one that we recorded during season 4. So if you're interested in this topic, you can learn much more by checking the full episode, and we will put a link to it in the show notes. And one more thing. ReFOCUS is part of a very big campaign called Where We Rise. It's us plus 29 other organizations that are trying to raise 1 million euros, yes, ambitiously, within 2 months for a grassroots organization movement. We are trying to do it for people on the move, people we supported for years, some of us decades, in Greece, in the Balkans. So if you can, please consider supporting this donation, this fundraiser. We will put all the links in the show notes. And please believe us when we say that any donation matters. It doesn't matter if it's €1 or €1,000. It will really go to a very noble cause.